What are the biggest setbacks to classic Mercedes ownership? I'm a big fan of the following phrase: prepare for the worst. Because when you prepare for the worst, everything else seems manageable. Preparing for the worst with classic Mercedes ownership involves sometimes knowing what the most difficult situations you will encounter as a new classic Mercedes Benz owner are. And so we're going to talk about these 3 items that can be a major setback for classic Mercedes Benz ownership that you should prepare for and be vigilant about. The first one we're going to talk about is rust. Rust is a killer with a lot of classic cars. In terms of rustiness, different Mercedes rust in different amounts. So if you look at cars like the 190E or the late 126, I've had to scrap very few of these cars because of body corrosion. It is a factor on these cars. We have a 300 SEL parts car here that lived for 30 years through every Michigan winter. But I've seen cars that have been through the same thing that have survived just because they got 1 or 2 underside car washes a year. Meanwhile, if you were to subject a 115 to the same thing, there'd be no car left to talk about. So the worst Mercedes as far as rust goes always tend to be the cheaper cars, and they always tend to be, although not always, they always tend to be cars that were living in cold climates and always cars that were used more as commuters than as fair weather cars. That means that while you'll run into some rusty 450 SLs, you'll see even more rusty 74 to 76 240Ds. While 123 series cars tend to rust less than, say, 114, 115, 110, 111 cars, there are some attributes on 110, 111, 108, and even early 114, 115 cars that make them more repairable. So if you are going to buy a rusty Mercedes, or I should say you're going to restore a rusty Mercedes, you need to start by knowing where the rust is. And instead of trying to fix it to a price, you need to come up with an attack plan and save up your money and know who you're going to work with to fix it, even if you are the person that is going to be doing the work. You really don't want to make mistakes with rust repair, including taking it to the wrong person. The second one I find are unknown major mechanical problems. So we're talking about engine failures, transmission failures, wiring harness issues, stuff like that that you just can't always plan on. So with engine failures, the first thing we try to look out for are compression issues, low oil pressure, high oil consumption. That means that when you do the trinity of the oil inspection and analysis items on an engine, you're going to be in a much better position. You won't be surprised and blindsided. The first one is the compression test. It is always a good idea to do a compression test and look for severe variances in compression. Not minor ones, but severe, like one cylinder's at 150 and one's at 90. That's severe. One cylinder's at 150 and one's at 125 is not severe. Another one would be pulling the lower oil pan to check for bearing material. A third one would be oil analysis. These last 2 will tell you if your engine is about to self-destruct internally, because if it is, and you still want the car, you need to negotiate a price where you can afford to justify the cost of a rebuild, an engine replacement, or other major repairs that the engine or transmission might need. Oil analyses can also be done on transmissions, by the way, and gas tests can be done on cooling systems to see if they need exhaust gas work. And again, these things aren't meant to make you walk away from the car. They're meant to make you renegotiate the price of the car, because if you're a seller, you can't sell a broken car for full market value. Hello? The third thing that we find is a major hindrance when people buy these cars are cars that have been, I would say, overly modified or poorly repaired in the past. We're talking about cars where they've had color changes, they've had accident repairs that weren't addressed properly, they've had electrical repairs that weren't addressed properly, they've had another engine put in that wasn't put in carefully or completely, you start adding all these things up and you get to a car that's pretty much a cost prohibitive car to repair. Only a small percentage of Mercedes have really been modified or repaired too much to deal with, but I don't like the idea. Okay, I'm going to be very clear about this. I don't like the idea of telling somebody to go buy a car without checking it out for accident damage, previous electrical damage, fire damage, an engine swap. All these things need to be considered. Even if you're buying a $2,000 or $3,000 Mercedes, they always seem to work better when nobody's just gone in there and said, oh, this is a cheap car, I could take a lot of shortcuts. Just because a car is cheap doesn't mean it doesn't deserve attention. I mean, it could take a $3,000 car down to $1,000. So you have $2,000 extra dollars to fix all of the modifications someone made. Now, there's some things I didn't mention in this video. The first one I didn't mention is parts availability. Compared to other classic cars, unless you're dealing with a Volkswagen, parts availability is not bad. You see a lot of Mercedes from like the 90s and early 2000s where parts availability is limited to used supply. But when you get to the time period before 1990, a lot of stuff is readily available. And if it's not, there's typically a good used part out there, or somebody has made an aftermarket solution, such as the Klima Design Works monovalve systems. One of the things that I think is also not much of an issue on Mercedes is finding the correct procedure information to repair the car. So a lot of people consider finding the way to execute a proper repair to be difficult, but there's so much information on some of the forums. Does have to be vetted, but it's out there on YouTube, on some of the Mercedes Facebook groups where you can actually talk to people who do this stuff, like my friend John Wright, who I'm sure is like swimming in help questions right now because he's such a capable guy. A lot of resources exist pertaining to how stuff should be repaired. It is your job to vet the information correctly and follow the procedures correctly. Anyway, I hope you guys found this video to be helpful and informative if you're considering the purchase of a classic Mercedes. Please like, share, and subscribe, and tap the bell for notifications. And thank you to all of our Patreon supporters and our customers that have entrusted us with their classic Mercedes. We really appreciate you guys. And remember, we're not just here for us, we're here for you too. And we appreciate you guys for keeping these cars on the road. I'll see you in the future.